So I'm going to just go through and call out a few things. And just looking throughout the video, I think one of the most common things that's going to be a bit of feedback is there are instances where what I see seems to indicate that the ball is all of a sudden getting extra energy from somewhere. So it's going at a certain speed and either it slows down way too quickly or it speeds up way too quickly. So that's mostly a timing and spacing issue, okay? Now, another thing I notice is that sometimes when people are stopping the objects, they tend to stop them perfectly at the same, they're both like vertical. That's another thing that's a little uncanny. So let's see, this is this one. Diego. So Diego's looking pretty good. I didn't see anything here that was too major to fix. I think the only thing is just how abruptly this object stops. You could probably have like a long taper at the end of your graph, right? So one of the tricks that I would do is when you have like something that's going to a stop, right, is you could set a key right before you're just about to have that curve flatten out and drag the second point out. So you get this very long taper, right? Just to kind of stretch that out a little bit more, just to slow it down. So it's one trick you can use to get things to just slow down ever so slowly, just by dragging 2 points farther away from one another, just to slow that down a little. What's this? Dominique. So one thing, Dominique, I'm just a little curious why the aspect ratio changes. So you can see how much different the size is, and it looks pixelated. So I see that the video is 1280 by 720, but it looks like there's a lot of room out on the edge. So something about this is a little off. I'd have to open this up separately and see, just to make sure it's the right size. This little one seems to have a lot of spin at the beginning. It feels like, you know, somebody really gave it a good flick. So it feels more like a car tire than just something rolling. It's just a bit quick, that's all. And I think you could get more contrast between light and heavy, right? Just a little. I think this one at the end, right, you have like a nice bounce here, and then it seems to get a bit floaty. This last bounce particularly, it feels like it's just rolling on an invisible platform here. It feels like it's just sort of stuck right along this line. So I would adjust the timing, have a lot less time to go up and down just to make that feel heavy, okay? And it's a little bit of skidding as we roll across. So especially the small one, it really slides across the floor right here. Okay, so just try to keep an eye on that, have it roll a shorter distance. So from here to here, it feels like a skid, right? So it feels like it's not sticking to the ground. Dylan. It's looking all right. Again, a little bit of sliding. Again, not an easy thing to fix. A bit more care in there.
Where do you see the sliding? Just at the beginning?
Right at the end when they slow down. So particularly here. So if you look at where this object, right, where it's making contact, so you can draw like a straight line and it feels like it's sliding, right? It doesn't feel like it's sticking to the ground. Yeah. Okay, little subtle things like that. This is stuff we're trying to do by eye, but that's where you just sort of notice it just sliding just a little. Okay. Yeah, and that's looking pretty good. Now, my one complaint here is both of these objects feel kind of similar in terms of weight. So who am I looking at here? So Okun, these feel a bit too similar in terms of how they feel when they hit the ground. So they're both bouncing very similarly. They don't feel that different in terms of heavy or light. It's just the height. So the little one bounces up higher, but the way that the big one bounces doesn't feel like it's a bowling ball. Especially over here, it feels almost like a balloon. It feels like a strong gust of wind just goes and just blows the thing over to screen left. And then the way that it stops abruptly, it destroys any sense of weight. Something that's really heavy would not slow down on its own like that. The only thing that would stop it would be hitting a wall or something, putting an abrupt brake on this thing. So watch out for that. Okay, same thing with the little one. It kind of stops very abruptly and it's also skidding, right? So it's not connected to the ground very well.
Oh.
Okay, Israel. Yeah, the big one is landing nicely. It gives a good sense of weight. Again, just here, it does feel like it's kind of sliding a little bit. I think it needs to rotate a little bit more based on the distance, just a little bit there, just a little bit of a slide. And I think it's going nice and slowly in terms of its rotation this way, And then all of a sudden here, it rotates back very quickly. So that feels really strong compared to this one. Right, so it's like, right, so it feels like there's, again, it got some energy or something that acted on it from the outside. And the little one starts to feel very balloon-like towards the end. So it feels like a rubber ball here, but then towards here, it starts to feel, again, it's in the air a long time. We're not getting a good acceleration. So I would reduce the amount of time it's in the air. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Here, June. So here, look at the spacing for the ball, right? So you have this, right? There's a big gap from here to here, right? So you were here, and then look what happens here. You start to slow down, and it's very even, right? So we're not accelerating. So what should happen is you look at here to here. The biggest distance you should get is just before you hit the ground. That's the biggest, and then everything else should get less and less and less. Okay? Otherwise, it feels like it's on an elevator, right? Just slowly going down. It also feels a bit like a straight line. It doesn't feel like there's a really good arc. Now, the way you're doing the bounce, that's not bad. But I think here, if you look at the direction going this way, all of a sudden, if you look at the spacing going this way, all of a sudden you hit this wall and you just stay there. So it feels like it hits something, as if there's a wall right there. So watch out, that abrupt stop. It really feels like something is pushing on the ball. And then, of course, it skids. It rotates, but it doesn't move. So it feels like it's not sticking to the ground. That one's a little better. I think maybe that last bounce, just given the height, I think this, it's still bouncing. It feels like right here, this last bounce, we should have one little vibration bounce just at the very end before you kind of have this thing roll. It feels like all that energy that was in the bounce all of a sudden just completely goes flat and it just goes on the line. So just add a little, just a little bump. Okay. This is this. Jimmy. It's not bad. Again, I think if this one is the bowling ball, right? This one doesn't feel like a bowling ball. This one feels like a rubber ball. Boing, boing, boing. The only thing I notice is this impact here. This feels much stronger. So the rebound, right? Going into the wall and then going out of the wall, that feels like a little bit stronger. It feels like it got hit, almost like somebody hit it with a tennis racket to give it a bit more energy. Right? So this feels like, whoa, it got a push as opposed to hitting the wall and bouncing back. This one, again, the spacing in here is a bit even. So from here to here, right? Very even and kind of linear. Then you pick up speed here. So there's a big change. And then that feels a bit even. And especially right here, I would probably get rid of this one. If you have a height like this and you go into this one, right? Then that might give you a better spacing gap. So you get into stronger acceleration. And then here, again, you have maybe too many frames. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 5 frames up, 5 frames down. I would probably reduce that. It feels a little bit floaty. Like if you wanted that kind of time, you might need to go up in the air more. Boom, boom. It starts to feel. And again, here, it's really heavy. I'd expect to have like right, that little bit of vibration, a couple little bounces just to kind of decay that energy. So it feels very slow and light. And especially the way that it comes to a stop, it doesn't feel like a heavy bowling ball. Johnny. Similar note, these both kind of feel a bit similar. Boom. So this is a bowling ball. I would really want that to decay, the boom, right? So it really should lose a lot of energy, but it's bouncing up. So they're very similar, right? In terms of texture and the way that they're bouncing. So I think you get more contrast between heavy and light. Right now, they both feel like rubber balls, not like a bowling ball and a rubber ball. A little bit of skidding here, pretty minor. Yeah, especially here, again, you have this bounce up and then it just goes flat, right? So we just do that. So with that kind of height, I would probably have boom, boom, right? Just a couple little bounces to decay and come to a stop, okay? This feels like all that energy just is bounce, and just kind of goes flat. Does that make sense, Johnny? Hopefully you're there. Are they in the chat floor? Can you double check? See? Thanks, Johnny there. Caitlin, are you there, Caitlin?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Okay, that's a little bit better, right? So the contrast, it really feels like that one is much heavier. The way that it bounces is very different than the other one. And my only note is maybe the little one seems to have so much energy, right, that it bounces quite far to screen left, so it hits the other wall. Not sure if I totally buy that. It feels a little bit like it gets a bit of a push, but you know, it's pretty close. Right? I think it's mostly just here going into the wall and coming back out. What I would probably do is if you look at where it was coming from, right, it was right here, hits the wall and then bounces, it actually goes further, right? So you kind of go up and actually gets further away from the wall. I would try to keep it at least the same or even a little bit less, just to decay this a little bit more so that it doesn't go so far. Okay. And maybe here, it does feel like it's sliding just a little. So maybe that's why it's also going a greater distance. Maybe it's just sliding a bit far. Nice work. Okay, Martin. So here, this one feels a bit evenly spaced and a bit linear. So it doesn't quite feel like a nice arc, right? So really double check your arcs there. The spacing feels a bit linear. And the spacing itself also feels quite even. There's not a big change, especially at the end. So you're losing points there for acceleration. It just feels like it's traveling at constant speed, doesn't accelerate to the ground. Right? You could use a little bit of squash and stretch on this as well. Right? So it stays the same shape. And right here at the end, again, it comes to an abrupt stop. And right in here, it feels like it skids, right? So it stops moving. You can basically have it just line up right there and it barely moves and it's just spinning and it's not connecting to the ground. So that breaks that illusion of, okay? And the way that it comes to an abrupt stop, right? Just one frame and it's just dead. You know, like a nice long taper to come to a stop. The heavy ball, it doesn't feel like it's spinning enough here. It doesn't feel like it's actually rolling on the ground. It feels like it's sliding on the ground. So just rotate a bit more. Watch out for the intersections here. Boom. That's not bad. I think if you look at the spacing though, it's very even, right? And then again, you have like a bigger pop here. The biggest spacing pop is near the height of the arc. And then again, you should ease out a little bit more. So check the spacing here. And what should happen is the spacing should be closest at the top and biggest just before you hit the ground, right? And then again, you have this sort of, it's very even, so it doesn't feel like we accelerate to the ground and then we just hit the ground and stop. There's no more energy, there's no more bouncing. So I'd expect like a little tiny bounce. And then you slide the ball over and it hits this wall, right? This invisible wall right here where it turns and just clicks. So that doesn't work as well. It feels very, 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 very off in terms of believability there. Okay, that makes sense, Martin? Is Martin there? No? Nicole.
Yeah, I'm here.
Ah, okay, thank you. Nicole. So similar note, I think there could be more contrast between the two objects. This one doesn't quite feel very heavy compared to this one. They're both bouncing kind of similar. So I would have this one decay a lot more. Again, this is feeling a bit linear, spacing, right? It's pretty even. So watch that. It should, again, be an arc, bigger spacing before you hit the ground, and then cut the spacing closer and closer. Same thing for the little one here. That's a little better. You have like a nice spacing gap from here to here. That's good. And then here to here, even in there, just watch that section. It does feel a bit linear and the spacing is a bit even, but at least you have the big gap right before you hit the ground. That's good. It's a nice use of squash and stretch. That's good. I think here, what I would try to do is maybe tone down the stretch and squash in this area because we have a much shorter height. It's going to be much more noticeable. So what you might do here, this is stretching too early. Make sure that you stretch the ball just for that one frame. So I would probably do it here. It'd be nice to kind of show the direction it was coming from and then squash. And then I would probably get right out of this. I don't know if you have the time. It feels like it's sticking to the ground for too many frames here, shorter bounce. So what I might do is just one stretch, squash, and then maybe just go straight up in the air and then roll over. And again, watch the spacing here. If you look at this edge and how fast the ball is going, right? So we kind of accelerate here, right? There's a big change and it gets slow, right? And it's slow. And then here, pop, right? So we have like, boom, just jumps this way, right? And then again, we have it, this is really close and then this is really big. So you want to look at in the graph editor is not just the up and down, which would be the translate Y. You got to look at the translate, and this one I'm pretty sure it's Z, right? So the direction going this way and that way. And try to keep it a straight line in between impacts. So at least find where it hits the wall and where it hits the ground, and then go find that in the graph editor, and that should be a nice straight line, right, from one impact to the other for the translate Z. And that will make sure that this distance, right, along the ground is evenly spaced, right? That'll give you the straight line. This will map right to this, okay? Does that make sense?
Yes,
Cool.
thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next. This one, Sophia. Sophia. So this one feels a little bit like it might be sliding just a little. This part feels a bit linear in here. The spacing feels just a bit even, right? And then you have this nice big gap here. That's good. But watch out for this part. This feels a little bit linear. So watch the shape of the path and also the spacing in there. Squash and stretch. That's looking good. Yeah. Again, watch out for this sort of stuff. We have spacing here. You really jump off the wall and then it gets really close. Okay, so this feels really fast and then this feels really slow. So all you need to do is go in and just adjust this first position and maybe just move it back a little bit, even out the spacing there. Okay. For these little bounces, I would probably only do one frame where you're on the ground. If you do two, it will start to feel like it's sticking. We have fewer frames to use. And I think at this point, I wouldn't bother doing any squash and stretch because it will just, everything will just slow down and stick. So I think it'd be better if you just hit one frame, click, and then go right back up. Does that make sense, Sophia?
Yep.
Okay. Heavy one. That one's looking okay. It's a bit quick, just the way that it decays. So maybe that first bounce, you could try and have a few more frames on either side. So you have 1, 2, 1, 2, right? So 2 and 2, it's very quick. So maybe try 3 and 3 or 4 and 4 until you find a point where it feels too slow. Okay, but 2 frames up and down seems a little quick to me.
Okay.
Yeah, and also think about how heavy this is. If it has a speed, it's going this way. Something that's really heavy is going to take more time to slow down. This feels like it really slows down. It almost feels like it hits heavy air, right? So it's just like when somebody dives into water really quick at the beginning, and then the friction from the water, right, just pushes right back. So it feels like the air is heavy. Okay.
Okay.
Next we got here. Oh, sorry, Sophia. Is this? Did I look at the wrong one? Is this an updated one?
Yeah, actually, it does. That's not my last version. I
Okay.
have 4 versions, so that's not.
Let's see. Is there one more? There we go.
That's my last version.
That's the last one. Okay, sorry. Let's see. Are those similar? What changed in your mind? What was the biggest
The
change?
time of the heavy ball, I think,
Okay.
and the squash and stretch when it hits the wall,
Okay.
and
Let's see. Let's make sure I got the right one. Yeah, it still feels like the heavy one. It needs more time for that bounce. That still feels a bit quick.
okay,
The little one, still the same issue. This feels a little bit linear in that
Okay.
area. And let's check that other note I have here. Yeah, it's still 2 frames on the ground. So this is 1, 2, 3. I think that's too many frames for such a short bounce. It'll feel sticky. It'll feel like it hits that point and just glues to the ground a little bit too long. Okay,
thank you.
thanks. Tom. So you got really nice contrast. The 2 objects feel very different, but the heavy one feels a bit too caricature, right? So it just feels like we kind of, again, the timing. I think for me, what it is when you count frames is 1, 2, 3. 3 frames to go from here to here. which is 1/8 of a second, which is really fast, very fast. I would say you need more time. Again, all things being equal, whether something's really heavy or really light, as long as they're dense and not spread out over a big surface, they would hit the ground at the same time, right? So if you did 10 frames here, I would do 10 frames here. If you wanted to caricature this, I might shave off a couple frames and try it, but I wouldn't try to sell the weight in the fall. I wouldn't worry about making this feel heavy as it falls. I'd make it feel heavy after it hits the ground. That's what's going to make it feel really heavy. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Here as well, it's not spinning enough, so it kind of slides. There's a little bit of an intersection right there, right? So you have this nice big spacing pop. And let's see, 1, 2, 1, 2. So again, 2 frames up, 2 frames down feels a bit quick. And then the way that this travels, this speed here feels very, very fast compared to how it was moving here. So it feels like the speed here, if you look at the distance it travels this way, just tracking the edge, right?
Mhm.
That's as fast as it's ever going to go. It shouldn't get faster, but over here, it starts to feel like this distance per frame is bigger until it slows down. So it feels like it got a little bit of a push going horizontally. Okay.
Okay.
And then a little more care with the way it stops. It's kind of skidding into the ground and sliding just a little bit there. Light one, I think the light one has a lot of spin at the beginning. So I would try to watch out for, you see like all of a sudden the spin stops. So like you can see this big change. It's like 45 degrees, 90 degrees, right? Big changes. And then right in here, it just slows right down. So all of a sudden the rotation
Yeah, I did it.
takes a big slide.
Yeah, I did it. I mean, I tried to do that.
I would keep the speed the same. So again, just look at the rotation. If you
Mhm.
look at where this is contacting, it feels like it's lifting up a bit too far. It feels like it should be more like this, right? So that you're still contacting the ground, right? So that speed that you get, you have to kind of figure out how that rotation is going to work and then keep it the same speed. So keep it linear. So it doesn't change unless you want to have it change after it hits the ground.
Okay.
And then here we have 1, 2, 3 frames on the ground. And what you might try is, well, maybe I'll do like a stretch, squash, stretch,
Yeah.
and then go up, and then here, make it a circle. And then don't do a squash here, don't do a stretch here, keep it a circle. And then this arc feels, if you look at the distance that you traveled from here to here, right, that distance, and then you look at the next bounce, right, from here to here, right? Look at that distance and see, does that change very much? Am I traveling a bigger distance than I did in that first bounce? Because all of a sudden it might feel like you got some speed, right? It feels a little bit like maybe we're slowing down just a bit. The other thing is, if you look at the height, how high up you go, you hit like this height, and the next bounce you hit this height. That should decay quite a bit. So I think it's hanging on to a bit too much energy when it goes to the wall here. So try and have it do like you got your bounce, it goes up, boink, 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 right? So have that decay happening, right? So it gets less and less with time. Okay.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
the hit here. Yeah, that's looking okay. Again, it's going through the ground just a little bit, so just watch that it's not intersecting the ground too much. And these little bounces, they feel a bit evenly spaced. If you look at the height change, it's very linear when you look at the in-betweens, right? So also feels a bit triangular. So the arcs are getting a little bit more like triangles, like little teeth. Try to watch the shape there. And the way it comes to stop, a little bit of sliding. Chic. It's not bad. There's a little bit of sliding, so the ball is not rotating enough. It feels like it needs to spin a bit more. It's kind of gliding across there. What I might try here, if you look at the distance here to here, and then here, it's kind of in the middle. So I would say what you could try doing is I would move this one down and see if you can get that to feel just a little bit better. And then same thing here, instead of lifting off the ground right away, if you look at the change, right, you might be able to say, well, if I hold that back and then pop here, I get really a nice acceleration, go up to that point and come back down. For this bounce, I would probably try to reduce this. I think this is too much. I would try to keep this more like a circle. not as much squash and stretch for these other bounces because they're much shorter. Less energy, less change. And then watch the bounce coming, you're right here, and then you bounce and you hit almost back in the same spot. So what I would try to do is hit the wall and then come back a little bit less. So it doesn't feel like it's just perfect. You got all your energy back going here. That's looking pretty good. A couple little bounces to decay. These last few bounces, I would really try to adjust the height because they feel very similar, that height and that height. Make them get much smaller, much quicker. So that the last bounce might just be like just a little tiny vibration, just barely noticeable. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was squashed. It was squashed too much, right?
I think over here in this part where the bounces are starting to get short, I would reduce the amount of squash and stretch. So it's not as strong as you did for the bigger bounces.
Okay.
For the heavy one, again, similar issue we've seen with spacing. It's very even, so it needs to accelerate a little bit more quickly. So you look at the spacing, get a big distance just before you hit the ground, right?
Yeah.
And then keep cutting that distance closer and closer here. Okay, so you get that
Okay.
nice strong impact. Feels a little bit flat. It doesn't feel like it has the same acceleration as the other ball. And I like what you're doing on the bounce. That's looking really nice. I think you could probably do one more little bounce right here. So you kind of go, you go up here, and then it just goes flat. I would just try and do like a little tiny bounce just after that, just to get a little tiny bit of texture in there.
Okay.
And one last little note is both of them are standing perfectly straight on the last frame. So it just seems way too designed. It feels like ballet, right? Where the dancers stop and ding, you know, they're just perfectly aligned up. So just try to adjust that so that they don't end exactly vertical. All right.
Okay.
Okay. Where are we at here? Wushik. Oh, was I looking at the wrong one, Wushik? I was giving you feedback. There was a second one.
Oh no, it was changed the naming convention.
Oh, okay,
was-
okay,
It should be have number 2 over there.
okay, okay, just to make sure. Okay. There we go. Okay. Yusuke. Okay. So this one, the heavy one, I'm assuming this one is the heavy one. This one feels lighter than this one. So this feels more like a rubber ball, but this one feels lighter than a rubber ball. So one thing here is, again, it's not on the platform. So that's kind of, again, a little giveaway. Make sure that we just see it on the edge, and then it should start to pitch and fall over. But check the spacing. The spacing is very even, right? So no acceleration. So I think you could probably take away frames. How many frames you got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you're doing 12 frames, but the spacing is very even. It's just straight line. So make sure, right, arc, and then biggest distance right before you hit the ground, right? That's 12, and this is 11. And then cut the spacing up really, really close up to the top. Okay, big spacing before you hit the ground. And the other thing is you have this momentum, but when you bounce up, it feels like you're barely moving in this direction. So it feels like there's not as much speed as you show here. So here we have like a speed that's going this way. When we hit the ground, it's like that speed is gone. So it makes it feel like it's slowing down much faster than you'd expect for something like a bowling ball. It feels like something's pushing against it here. And then as it turns, it's not moving. So it doesn't feel like it's connected to the ground there. So it's sliding. Now the rubber ball, that's working a little better. Again, it's still a bit even, especially in this area. It's very even. The spacing is not changing very much. So it feels kind of like we're missing out on acceleration here as well, right? So these two are so close together. Maybe what you should do is have your stretch pose here, have your squash pose here, and then here, get rid of this one, get rid of this one, and just have this one. So you go from here to the stretch and then to the squash. So that way you get much more acceleration in there. Okay. And then if you look at this arc, it feels a little bit sloped. It feels like it's kind of slanted a bit more this way. So just double check with the motion trail on there and see, you know, again, evenly spaced, you could get more acceleration out of this. The spacing is too close before the impact. These are too close together. We should have a bigger distance. So again, you look at your impacts and say, okay, the frame before this one, I should be here. And I shouldn't have anything between here and here. That's going to be my big acceleration. And then I'll put all the other positions up here. The way you're hitting the wall is good. Bounces back nice. Just a little bit of sliding at the end. Okay, so mostly it's just spacing in arcs just during the bounces. Okay, Yusuke?
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah. Andre. Okay, so a little bit of stuff at the end there that caught my eye. So this one, it's sliding a little bit. It should be rotating a bit more to make it feel like it's sticking to the ground. Again, spacing's a bit even in here, and this part feels very similar. It's a bit like a straight line. And then this is good. That's a good impact, right, with that big spacing gap. But watch this part. This feels a little flat. Got squash and stretch. That's good. That's a good gap. That's nice. Hit the wall. Again, what I would probably do here is just do one frame because it's a small bounce. Maybe just do one frame of contact where you just have it hit the ground. This might feel like it's sticking to that position for too many frames. Okay. And again, watch the spacing. If you look at the impact and the in-between, right? Very linear and very evenly spaced. So this one should be favoring this one, right? So if you look at where that one was, take this position and move it much closer to the high point. You get a stronger acceleration. Same note here, just one frame on the ground, right? So just hit that and then bounce back up. And that'll feel a little better. It's a little bit of sliding, but pretty close. Heavy one. That's looking good. Again, the spacing, what I would try to do if you look at the impact and here, that's good. So at least it is accelerating. Not bad. You could try to push this a little if you wanted to experiment. You could move this up to get a really big boom, really nice acceleration when it hits the ground. I think here the trick is you have 2 frames up and then 2 frames down. That feels a bit quick. And then as well here, you have to really keep the high points a little bit closer so you get that nice bump and acceleration there. But I think 2 and 2 is a bit quick. Try 3 and 3. It feels like it decays a little quickly, right? So it's when it just stops. I think you need more time for that first bounce and then maybe a couple of secondary bounces after for the heavy one. Okay? Does that make sense? Or was I commenting the wrong one again? Did I go all the way through to Sophia's? Sorry, I think that was Sophia. That was yours.
No, my last version was the older one.
The other one, okay.
The older one.
I got mixed up here. I let it play through. Sorry, Andre. Okay. Where'd you go? Am I looking at the right one? Andre. There you are. So watch out for the contact. Evenly spaced in here. This is good. We're gonna get the stretch and the squash, but it feels like we're sliding over, right? So look at that contact point. You see how that moved? That should be right here. So just take this position and move it over. And the same thing here, right? Keep everything anchored at that point. You got a bit of a plateau here. So there's a bit of a flat line for a couple frames over there. So just watch the graph editor. Spacing's looking okay when you go into the impacts. You have bigger spacing, but I would still, right? You have a big gap. I would still move this up just a little bit more. If you look at where this position is, it's a bit even in there. Same issue here. We're sliding on the floor, right? So on the ground when we go up. And then here, I think that might be too many frames. So what I would try to do is, it looks like you're squashing, right? The squash, I don't think you need it. I would get rid of it and just go to a squash in this direction. So make sure you're using this squash. So instead of it going this way, go that way, right? So it should be a vertical stretch, right? Not a horizontal stretch. And then I would just put one frame, just one frame, and then bounce back. So it feels like we're sticking to the wall for too many frames there. It slows everything down. And then here, this last bounce, I like the idea. This is great, but I think the amount, it feels too much. It feels like something is shaking the ball. So just take the height and just move it way down. So it's just barely noticeable. So you just barely go up just a little bit, just to make it feel a little bit like a vibration. Okay? And it feels like the ball gets a lot of speed going this way. It doesn't feel like it slows down. It's like it has a lot of energy until right at the end when it just skids to the wall. And again, it sticks to the wall and then it feels like something gives it a flick. So it's gonna pop and it just moves and just stops right away. So a little bit of finesse there at the end. I think it's probably easy enough to just have this thing roll and come to a stop before it hits the wall and get it to feel believable. Okay? Does that make sense, Andre?
Yeah.
Same thing with the heavy ball spacing. Right here, it's too close, right? So if you look at that and that, very even. So this position should be higher, right? Make sure that's a good gap to give you a good sense of acceleration to the ground. And then just the way this thing comes to a stop, again, it's skidding and then it just stops dead on that frame. That needs a nice long taper. So it needs more time to kind of roll and settle, right? It just feels like it just comes to an abrupt stop. What makes it even more noticeable is that all the stripes are straight up vertical, right? So it just sends up a red flag. It's just like artificial. Okay.
Yeah.
This one was Sophia, which we already looked at. And here we are. Aaron. Is Aaron there?
Yeah, I'm here.
So here, one thing I noticed, it feels like this object, it feels like it actually slows down just before it goes over the edge. So I would just try to keep that constant. I just get this sense that it feels like we kind of slow down a little bit here. So if you look at the distance you're traveling frame to frame from here to here, right, it gets really close and then it gets bigger and then it gets shorter, right? So there's a little bit of push-pull right in there, just a little bit of space in there. Bounce is looking nice. Maybe over here, it feels a little bit like you could adjust the spacing on the ground. It feels like we're kind of breaking a bit fast in here, but it's really minor. It's really close. Right in there, it feels like we get a little bit of a push right in here. If you look at the distance you're traveling per frame this way, right, really close, and then you get a big push here. So it's just a little area where all of a sudden it changes. So just have a look at the translate Z, which is probably the one going this way, and see if it's a straight line or if it's a little bit off of a straight line. It feels like we get a little bit of extra lift over here, just a little bit of a push. Now this one I think could feel heavier. I think it's close, but I think I would play around with the texture a little bit. So the way that it falls, a bit even through here, and again, right before you hit the ground, right? It's very even. This is like halfway. So what I would probably do is get rid of this one and have from here to the landing, have a bigger gap to get that acceleration to really read. And then here you could play around with the timing a little bit. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe try and take a frame away from either side, make it 4 and 4, just to take a little bit less time. And then the other bounces, I think they're working pretty good. I would just maybe experiment with like dropping the height a little bit more quickly. Right, so you have the right idea. I would just experiment with just having it decay a little bit more quickly. And the other thing is looking at the distance it's going this way, the speed, it really hits a wall right here. So we're kind of trucking along at a speed. You can really see that's the distance I'm traveling. Then you hit this one bounce right here. And all of a sudden it feels like it sticks. It feels like heavy air, right? All of a sudden we're pushing through a different medium. Okay. So it just feels like we're putting the brakes on a bit quick there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. I think this last little rotation back, it feels a bit much. You could probably tone that way down. You could just have it reach here and then maybe just settle back to like even this much, but spread that out over like 10 frames. So it's just like, right, just a little recorrection going back. This feels a bit too heavy-handed there. Feels like somebody kind of yanks it back. This one, what do we got here? Alejandro. Okay, so I think the speed of the rotation, it's a bit quick. This feels like it's really spinning very quickly. So you could tone that down. Oops. There. and then it slows down. So I think the rotation speed is catching my eye a lot, right? It's just like, right? So it feels like a tire spinning, just a little bit strong. So I would just tone it down a little. In terms of the spacing, again, similar issue right in this area. This seems to be a difficult spot to get the spacing to feel more interesting. It's kind of linear. And then here as well, you got your contact. I would probably get rid of this one, get rid of this one, get rid of this one, and hang on to this one, and try something like a big gap, and then do like a squash and a stretch, and then crush all the other positions. Nice arc, and again, keep dividing that up, right? Halfway, halfway. Really make sure that you have that nice acceleration in there. Okay. That'll help that feel much stronger.
Thank you.
Same thing here, and same thing. This path, just looking at where you get to about here, and you're here, it feels like we could round out the arc a little bit more. Right now, it feels a little bit sharper than I would like, so it feels a little bit more like this. I would try to just expand out the arc just a little bit to round it off. And again, look at your contacts, and this you could delete, this you could delete. You just try and hang on to the big gaps. So, you know, okay, if that's my high point and that's my contact point, then I'll just draw in my path, and then biggest gap, say about halfway. And then this one, biggest gap halfway, biggest gap halfway. And that'll help keep that sense of acceleration going. Okay. Then here, I think maybe in this part, 1, 2, 3, 4, those 4 bounces, I think the height is too similar. It feels like the ball isn't losing energy. So what you could do is you could try to reduce the height and say, maybe this one, I'll bring that height down. And this one, they may not even be noticeable as bounces. It might be more just vibration, right? Just feels like it goes up, down, up, down, down, but very, very short height. So it doesn't feel like it's being shaken, right? So it feels like it's being lifted and dropped to the ground way more than I would expect. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And then same issue here, we hit like a heavy wall of air, right? So at this place, we're going at this speed, and then all of a sudden you hit a point, and all of a sudden everything just hits really quickly. So that should be a little bit more gradual, right? So that you have a little bit more time to slow down rather than having all that speed all of a sudden hit right there. Okay. Now, did I critique this one yet? The big one? There, not yet. So this one, I like the way that it falls. This is okay. Boom. But I think here you have this position and then this one. So this one you need to ease out. So this is where you were, and this is where you're going the next frame. So take this position and move it up and really favor, sorry, tablet's having some issues, favor the high point. And if you look at the height that for that first bounce, the next one, I wouldn't go this high at all. It should be barely noticeable. You could just barely lift that up just slightly. And again, when you hit the ground, maybe I would do just a slight little up and down. So when you get to this kind of subtle detail, it's almost like one frame up, one frame down. It starts to become like little shark teeth in the graph editor. And it's just to get that feeling of just a little movement to match the sound. And again, the spin here feels a bit much. So if you look at where this is hitting the ground, you can see that that's sliding too far, right? So you look at, okay, that's where this would be. That would be more like this, right? But I would stick to the ground. It's just skidding in a little bit too much. And then over here, it feels like it's slowing down, and then it gets a push. Then it gets pushed to the wall. So again, it loses that sense of speed and weight. And then especially here, hits the wall, digs in, and then gets abruptly pushed back. So a little bit of finish there. Okay. That makes sense, Alejandro?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. And Alex Zhang. So I think here, one thing that would help is this is like synchronized swimming. They're both exactly the same time. And this, the timing, right? So it doesn't quite feel like one is heavy and one is light. So you have this one hit, they go up, and then here, right? So this is like ballet, right? It's like da 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 da, bounce, bounce, bounce. They're just timed the same. You want to make sure you offset them. So the heavy one should decay really quickly compared to the light one. Right, so I'll look at the little one. assuming that looks most like the rubber ball. In a couple positions where we're kind of a little bit floating off of the platform. Similar issue here with the spacing. Look at where you're going. And then here, this is right in the middle. So I would, again, maybe try to do something like this and say, well, let's do a stretch that leads into that squash. And then we could take this position or this position, maybe use this one and get a really big change, get a nice big acceleration. Watch some of the paths. They do feel a little bit linear in some places, right? So kind of a straight line. It's in a part of the arc there, so you can do something to correct that. And then same thing here, the spacing is really even, right? So that's almost dead in the middle. So favor the high point, move the spacing up so you're much closer to that one and you bounce out. Here as well, what I would try to do is reduce the amount of squash and stretch. It's a shorter bounce, try not to do so much, and especially like not that we can see it. Right here, what you have is this thing goes from here to here. So it feels like it's being pushed this way and then it goes up. Right, so it kind of plays with our eyes a little bit. It doesn't quite feel like it's connecting, and then it goes this way. Right, so there's a little bit of zigzag happening there. So it's not just tracking the center, but also look at the edges, right? Because that might trick your eye. Here, this feels like a big change going from here to here. That's a big distance. And then here, it's a much smaller distance. So it feels like that edge of the ball is kind of being held back, that something's pushing on it. And then it goes into the wall here. So just watch that. Same thing here. I would probably just hit the wall and then come off the wall, right? So it's just, boom. Think of this as just like if you were doing a bouncing ball here, right on the ground. For a really short one, I wouldn't do stretch, squash, stretch if it's a small bounce because it'll feel like it's sticking to the ground. I think for the wall, it should feel like a stronger impact. So just hit the wall and bounce off, just a ricochet. So you don't feel like you're sticking to the wall too much. And then track that arc. Right, so it feels a little bit like there's a corner. It feels a little bit like there's a bit of a corner in there. So just watch that bit there. That's a bit linear. So on the whole, there's not enough contrast between the two to pick which one is heavy and which one is light. They're both doing very similar things. So I think if you're going to pick this one to be the heavy one, it's that first bounce that should show it's very different than this one. You can see how it hangs in the air. It travels again. You look at the spacing here, it's barely moving. And then all of a sudden, big gust of wind gets pushed over, then it slows down again. Right? And if you track the height, it's very evenly spaced. So again, there's no sense of acceleration. So that needs some work to get that to feel believable. Also, I would do no squash and no stretch on a heavy object. If that's the one you want to do is the heavy one. Keep that feeling as solid and inflexible as possible to help create that illusion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
welcome. That's Alex. Chen Zuan.
That's the floor asked me to change the name, so I submit the new name to match
okay.
the Moodle name. Yeah.
Okay, so
It will be
you
totally the same.
prefer to be called Alex, but this is the name on Moodle. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is the previous name, so I changed
Okay,
it to the
okay.
Alex Zen.
Ah, okay, gotcha.
Sorry,
Okay.
I got
No,
confused.
that's okay.
Okay.
So again, what I would try to do here is if this one is the heavy one, they're just, again, both bouncing similar in the same time. Did I already critique this one? Is this similar?
Yeah, it's
I did.
exactly
Okay.
the same.
Same one,
reason,
okay.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I thought this looked familiar. There we go. Thank you. Daniela. Okay, so that's a little bit clearer which one is heavy just by the way that one hits. Here, it feels, what's throwing me off with this one is it's not spinning enough. It feels like it's just being pushed and just sliding off, so a little bit of rotation there. And watch the spacing going down. This feels very even, right? So I think you could get a bigger acceleration. So I think this one especially, I would just push this up even more, right? And then you could probably kill that one. Right, let's get rid of one place and just boom, you get this nice big impact. And the way that it's decaying looks nice. So that's really good. I think there's just a little bit off, something's a bit off with the way it hits the ground right here. Yeah, it just hits the ground and you can see this contact point that would be in the ground. It just skids. So it feels like it comes to rest. It feels like it stops really quickly. So I think having maybe another little bounce, just a slight little one frame up, one frame down, and having it roll across the floor a little bit longer would be better. It just stops dead. Okay, the rubber ball, I think the first bounce is looking okay. Again, similar spacing notes I would give. There's your stretch, I'm sorry, squash, sorry. And then I would maybe move this position down so you kind of impact. And then here, get rid of that one. I would use that one or maybe push it up a little bit. So you have a really big change. You go from here, right, to here, right? You get like boom, a lot of change. This one as well, let me clear my drawing, look where we're at. It feels a little bit linear, right? So that feels a bit linear. What I would try to do here is, again, if you have your squash position, go to the stretch, and then maybe favor a little bit over. So you kind of broaden that arc a little bit before you come back down. Here as well, the spacing, I think I would ease out a little bit more. Like this feels like we're kind of picking up speed a little too quickly, and it starts to feel very even. So again, maybe you have a squash, but not as much, but you definitely have an impact. You could play around with this. So maybe I'll put my stretch pose here. I won't do like the same pattern, but I'll make sure that I'm up really high before I hit the ground. So I have a nice big gap before I hit the ground. The rest of that, again, bit of skidding, right? This sort of needs to rotate a little bit more as it comes to a stop. All right. That makes sense, Daniela?
Yeah, thank you.
What do we got here? David Avila.
Hi.
Hello. So this one, it feels just a bit too much like a corner. So when you have this kind of speed, I'm expecting it to go here, right? But it just drops straight down. So what you would do is, to correct that would be just to get rid of this distance or make it a lot less. So if you want that to just barely roll over the edge, you give it some speed, it feels like it just stops dead and goes straight down. Okay, so it's just an arc issue. The way that it's falling looks good. You could definitely push the spacing if you want a little bit. That's a nice big gap, but you could lift this up a little bit more, right? And see what you get, and then adjust this one up, right? And sort of just favor that high point a little bit more and see if you get a really solid impact there. The way that it's hitting the ground, I think you could probably get away with fewer of these little bounces, or make the height get so little you barely notice it. So it's just almost imperceptible. It feels like it's kind of shaking a little too much there. Then you got a little bit of skidding, not connecting to the ground there, just sort of sliding over around a little too much. Rubber one, it feels like it gets this little shove right here. It's going at this kind of speed, and all of a sudden push, right? So it gets a much bigger push going this way. So if you look at the spacing going this way, it's just right here. It feels like it gets a little push off the cliff. And watch the linear kind of nature of this here. It goes a little bit like a straight line. Again, spacing, you could push that. I might put the stretch here going into the squash, and then you could probably, get rid of this, get rid of that, and just hang on to this and make sure it's a circle. It looks like the squash and stretch controls are firing a bit early. Yeah, impact's looking good. For the impact, what I might do here, I mean, this is kind of maybe, yeah. Boom. I think just try to avoid having to go up really high. I think you have the right idea. You're kind of like accelerating the wall, and you could kind of like boom and just go up a little and then come back down, or you could just go boom and hit and come back down. But it feels a bit like it goes up higher than I would expect. It feels like something pushed it this way and went up. And then watch your ease out. It feels like in here you're dropping the ball a little quickly, so you have a nice acceleration. But I think here, this part is a bit even, right? It's like halfway. I might just move this one up a little bit. And these last few bounces, again, they feel like there's too much up and down and too little time. So it feels more like it's being shaken as opposed to just bouncing. So drop the height way down for those little tiny bounces. And again, pay attention to the speed going this way. It feels like that's a little erratic in here, that we kind of have some places where we're really going quickly to the left, and then we're slowing down a bit quickly until the very end. And there's a little bit of, again, it's a little bit of push, pull, just trying to even that out, especially here at the end. It kind of gets a little bit of like, right, just a little bit of shaky. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Okay. Danette, how you doing, Danette?
Good, how are you?
Good. So this other ball is being very polite, waiting to the last moment, right? Very nice of you. Here, again, a bit of linearity in this part, so it just feels a bit linear. Spacing's a bit even, especially here. So look at that, and then look at that, look at that, and look at that, and be like, yeah, I want that one. Check. And then I'm gonna go here, and then everything else, I'm gonna make sure it's on a nice arc. Maybe adjust that over, and then keep cutting the spacing in half and in half and in half, just to get a nice acceleration. This feels a bit flat, a bit too similar. Okay, evenly spaced. And then over here, this is a nice kick up. I'm wondering if that feels a bit high, right? It feels like maybe this one up here, maybe these are too similar. Like these two positions feel like they're almost at the same height. Just watch that. And what I would try to do, if you look at the heights of the bounces, so you start here, you go here, right, that height, and then this one, I think I would try to drop this down a little bit to show that it's lost a lot of energy, just to kind of get rid of some of that momentum. That's looking good. You could probably add, I would really drop this height as well, make that go way down. After that impact, there should be very little impact, so we've lost a lot of energy once we hit the ground. So keep the height smaller. And right here, when you have a bounce like this kind of height, and then it just stops, it just feels odd that all of a sudden all that energy in the height is just left and it just goes all into horizontal. So you might put in just a couple little vibrational bounces just up and down just a little, right? And what you do in the graph editor, what's really nice is you can look at that part and say, well, here's my translate Y, right? My translate Y, and I'm just trucking along here, and I've got a spot here, and I'll just go key, 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 and then I'll go and shift it. So I do this, right? So all those points, they were here. And all I do is just grab like the odd points or the even points and just lift them up a little bit. And then you just get this little sawtooth pattern, okay? And just make sure that it's not the same height all the time. You wanna make sure it's up and then less and less, right? And then it's just down, okay? And then watch out for the way it settles. It feels like it comes to, again, it feels like there's a little bit of a push. We stop rotating the same speed. And again, it just stops perfectly, all vertically lined stripes. So I think you could definitely bring this to a more organic stop. It's a bit abrupt. Okay. And same note with the heavy one. This one, I think it's spinning the wrong way. So it's got backspin, right? This would only work if you were playing ping pong, right? So you cut the ball and give it a nice backspin. It's got to rotate this way. Okay, and then the speed, so 1, 2, 3, 3 frames, right? So that is 1/8 of a second. It's really quick. So you could definitely take more time there, okay? And then much less rotation. It's spinning like crazy, and then it just comes to an abrupt screeching halt. So we lose all sense of weight. So it's okay to have these bounces take less time, right, with the heavier object. But I think here, what really tricks your eye is the speed. If it's rotating that fast and it's heavy, there's no way it would stop rotating that quickly unless something even stronger stopped it, okay?